My name is Jim Trainum. I'm professor in the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department. And I was chosen because to be the host today, because I have, out of my 43-year career, at least 35 years in industry. And it's really my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mitch Waldman. He is Executive Vice President of Government and Customer Relations for Huntington Ingalls Industries. It's America's largest military shipbuilding company and a provider of professional services to government and industry. Mitch is based in Washington, D.C. and engages the politicians, the bureaucrats, business and trade associations, and think tanks. He also leads the corporate advanced technology effort. Mitch previously served as Vice President of Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems. He also served as National Security Advisor for former Senator Trent Lott, as a National Security Consultant to the Office of Senate Majority Leader, and he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy. But the best part, as you all know, Mitch earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Florida, and he serves the department on the External Advisory Board. He also earned a law degree from Catholic University and is a graduate of the Yale University Executive Management Program. Mitch is an extraordinary Gator graduate. It is my distinct pleasure to turn the show over to Mitch, who will speak on the subject executive communications. Thank you, Mitch.
Well, thanks, Jim, and appreciate you all moderating today, and just it's a great opportunity to at least do this in virtual world. The past 6 or 8 months certainly has been different for all of us, and I regret I can't be with you there in person. I love when I have an opportunity to come to Gainesville. The Gainesville of today is a little different than the Gainesville of the late 70s and the early 80s, but still feels like home, and I'd love to get back there anytime I can. So in the interim, it's a great opportunity to be here with you, at least virtually, and to talk about executive communications. But before I do that, I'm going to do a little executive communicating right now to tell you a little bit about Huntington Ingalls Industries. Not quite an infomercial. I'll leave that to you. Those that are watching live and those that are going to watch when this is replayed on the YouTube live channel to explore Huntington Ingalls Industries. That is the parent company that owns Newport News Shipbuilding, Ingalls Shipbuilding, and a division called Technical Solutions. As Jim mentioned, we are the largest shipbuilder in the United States. We build about 70% of the ships that the Navy uses. We build large Coast Guard cutters for the United States Coast Guard. We don't build any commercial ships. That's predominantly done overseas. There are some commercial ships that are built domestically by a handful of very, very good shipbuilders, but commercial ships are just fundamentally different than Navy ships. The only thing in common I like to say is they both float, and Navy ships are painted gray and they just do fundamentally different things. So we have about 42,000 folks. I'll share with you in a second the size of the company, but we are a major manufacturer in the United States, and we're just honored to do the work that we do, building ships, providing capabilities, supporting those capabilities for not just our Navy, but our nation as a whole. So I always like to start with our values, and I hope you all start with your values no matter what you decide to do. Whether you decide to join the Huntington Ingalls Industries team or whatever you decide to pursue going forward, start with your values. I talk to a lot of folks that are retiring from government service, a lot of folks that want to switch careers, and I tell them the same thing, that it's most important to look at yourself and to understand your values, what's important to you. Just make sure that your values align with whoever you want to engage with, whatever company you want to work for, because I don't care what the compensation package is what great office they may give you overlooking a big metropolitan area. If your values aren't aligned with who you're going to work for, within about a year, I suspect you're not going to be a very happy camper. So I encourage you to start there first, to understand who it is that you're going to spend time with, work for, devote your working hours to, and just make sure there's alignment there. We start with integrity. I tell my folks, I tell our company when I speak to the leadership, it all starts with integrity and it ends with integrity. You come to the table with your integrity intact, and your integrity can go up in smoke very, very quickly. So always guard that. We work in the center of the channel. It's a great maritime metaphor of everything within that channel is moral, legal, and ethical. But if you're not in the center of the channel, if you're on one side or the other of the channel, it's just too easy to go aground. When you're in the center of the channel, it just takes you a little bit more time and more energy to potentially run afoul, to run aground and have problems. So stay in the center of the channel no matter what you do. We focus on integrity first, safety, honesty, engagement, being responsible for what you do for yourself and for your teammates, and obviously performing, living up to your commitments. So we live our values. I told you I'd give you the number again in a brief introduction of Huntington Ingalls. We're about a $9 billion company. We have 42,000 employees. Most are domestic, but we do have international locations around the globe in 16 different countries. From an engineering standpoint, we have nearly 7,000 engineers. We like to say that we build ships, but we're predominantly a workforce development company. As you can see by the numbers, we're a pretty big engineering company that design these products. And again, it's not just ships, it's things that we do for other government agencies. We do a lot of work for the Department of Energy. If you're interested in working for Los Alamos National Lab, we're there as well. Or any of the national labs for the Department of Energy, we have a presence. We also do quite a bit of work for other federal agencies and other military services. So it's a team. Huntington Ingalls brings these processes together and builds these great products, support these great products, but we actually have 5,000 suppliers across the country. We are in 49 states. You can see from this map, Wyoming is the only state where we don't have a supplier in. We're working on that because we want to make shipbuilding a 50-state effort. But we spend about $14 billion across 49 states over a 5-year period. But our suppliers matter. And during this time of COVID, we've had strong connectivity to our suppliers, making sure that we were with them, that we were a source of information for them, that we understood their needs, that we worked with our government customers to understand what work we could advance to these different companies to get them working, to keep them working. Because not only is that work required for our Navy and National Security and Coast Guard, but it also is good work for these companies, supporting the economies and the communities that they're in. So shipbuilding is not just a coastal thing in Virginia and Mississippi and California, but it's something that happens over all 50 states. So I encourage you to jot down some of these different websites. You can find us on social media. I encourage you to explore who Huntington Ingalls Industries is in all these different domains. So that's the brief infomercial. That's who I am. As Jim mentioned, I spent most of my career in government service, 30 odd years, most of which was in Navy, working for the Navy, supporting the Department of Navy, and finished out my career as the National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. And that was just a tremendous opportunity to work in a different branch of government, the legislative branch versus the executive branch, and just do some fascinating work to learn, to grow, to make a difference, to be part of something that was bigger than I am. I will tell you, not to give a political commercial, because I like to say as the DC guy for Huntington Ingalls, I actually don't do political things. I actually grow relationships and build upon those relationships to achieve objectives, not just for our company, but hopefully those objectives are aligned for our nation as well. And so being a creature of Washington, D.C., It's an honor to work in this domain. And a lot of what I do is executive communications, whether it's with my company as an executive vice president, my relationships with the board of directors, or with the other members of the senior staff, or the 42,000 people that work for our company. Executive communications is a really big deal. And I encourage you, whether you're an undergraduate student or a graduate student, or have any interface, frankly, with the government or up and down your own chain of command, with a company or even within the department, to really understand the tenets of executive communications. That's really what I want to focus on here for the next few minutes. I think the agenda is I'll talk for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then Jim will moderate some questions that will come in through chat, and I just encourage you to participate. I do miss the interaction and seeing you personally, but I do encourage you to ask some questions. And as we say in my world when I do these, really challenge us in terms of our perspective and experience across really any issue that you choose to ask about. But communications, what is it and why is it important? I'll tell you that what you're doing now as an engineering student, again, undergraduate or graduate, projects that you do, the teams that you serve on, all of those serve you well. I always put a plug in for the engineering economy course because I think that's actually a very, very important course that I believe is probably required for you. It wasn't required for me, but I took it anyway because it gives you a little sense of the business side of engineering. So in engineering, you have facts, you have challenges, you have rules. You apply the rules to the facts, you come up with solutions. The business side of our business is important as well. You can learn about the economic side of it through engineering economy, but we don't spend enough time talking about how to communicate all this. How do you not just write and talk, but to understand communications is very much a process. It's very much something that you will be challenged to engage in, whether you're working on the design of a rocket or an automobile or something else. You have to be able to communicate what you're doing up and down your chain of command to customers, to your leadership, to the folks that are working for you on teams. And so I'm going to give you 10 things to think about, and we'll just call them executive communication guidelines. They seem simple, but I'll tell you, this takes practice. It takes practice to understand just a range of things that you need to think about as you craft your communication, whether it's oral or written, whether you do it live via Zoom, whatever the medium happens to be. This is something that you learn, and generally it takes a while to learn it. So I encourage you to get as much experience as you can with regard to communication and leading, and hone your skills. And so we're going to start with the fundamental question of what's the objective of the communication? Should always ask that. Why am I doing this? What's the objective of this particular engagement? Am I providing a status report to people? Is it a good status report? Is it a bad status report? Is it change? I will tell you, there is a fundamental rule of communication. Bad news never gets better over time. I encourage you to heed that because you will be amazed once you start working or engaging or teaching. Bad news never gets better over time. And so share bad news, but also don't be in a position of putting, as I say, the monkey on somebody else's back. When you bring bad news, bring a solution. You're going to be an engineer, bring solutions, bring opportunities. You don't necessarily have to have a fully developed solution, but bring a plan as to how to address that. So what's the objective of the communication? Is it a status report? Is it just informational? Is it background, or is it supported to a related discussion? Is it decisional? Do you expect the person receiving the communication actually to do something with it? In which case, guess what? You actually may have to ask. I've lost the count of the number of times when I was working for the majority leader where I'd have a constituent or an individual meet with me. And the first question was, okay, why are we meeting? And if it was decisional or they were asking for something, I'd always ask them, because often they would forget to ask me, how can I help you? What are you asking for? So If it's decisional, make sure that the individual or group that you're briefing understand that at the end of this presentation, you expect a decision. Or if not, tell me how I can facilitate a decision getting back to you so we can bring this to closure. That's number one. Number two, who's your audience? That's a little bit more challenging in a virtual world. I actually have no idea who's on the other side of this camera, other than a few folks. Jim, I know, is there, and the folks that are facilitating this are there. But beyond that, don't know who's there. Don't necessarily know who's going to be watching this over time in a streaming fashion. So, but try to understand who your audience is and tie that back into the purpose and objective for your communication. Are these individuals that you are briefing or communicating to in a position of responsibility or authority or accountability? What's their expertise? What's their aptitude? Are you briefing folks that may know more than you? Often you are going to be the smartest person in the room with regard to the specific thing that you may be working on or briefing. That's okay. The folks that you may be briefing, particularly if they run a company or a senior, don't need to know the details of what you are briefing. They need to know top level issues, top level challenges, top level concerns, so that they can make an informed decision. But understand who the audience is and what their expertise and background is. Understand what their constituency is. Are you briefing an individual or a group that may have competing interests? And that's something you need to be mindful of. You always should try to understand what a competing interest may be, particularly if you're going to brief a group and you want a decision out of them, or you want to understand how the information is going to be used. Understand their blind spots, what their focus, what their lens may be as they come into the briefing. Try to understand that. It will make your communication much more effective and allow you to really hone it much more significantly. Number three, who's the audience to you? Why do they matter? Is it your boss? Is it a peer? Is it a subordinate? Is it a competitor? Or as I like to say, a word you may not have heard of before, is it a competi-mate? Competi-mate is someone that in some instances you may be competing against, but in other instances you may be teaming with. And so you may find yourself in industry on a team for one project where you may be competing against a portion of that team on another project. Not unusual at all. Understand who your audience is and what their interests may be. Okay, number four. Here's probably one of the most important things that I'm going to say in the area in which I think a lot of folks have challenges. Is the communication ready for prime time? Is it ready? Are you ready to communicate something? You may be writing a 100-page engineering report, but if you can't appropriately distill that report down to 2 or 3 major issues or decision points, you are not ready to brief that prime time. A decision memo is something I often use in Washington. I use it when we communicate with the Congress or with leadership in the executive branch or in administration. You generally need to be able to distill your communication down to a brief issue statement, a background statement, an outline of what the major program or initiative may be, and then your ask. And if you can't distill that down to a single page, and oh, by the way, single page in normal typeface, right? Unlike maybe some reports you're doing now where you use that 8 font to try and get everything on a page. It needs to be normal margins, normal typeface. Otherwise, I'll tell you, the person in a very senior position will put it aside. Not unlike your resume. Make sure your resume is legible and readable and understandable and generally fits on a page. You may want to put references on a second page, but if your executive communication is not on a single page, executives often won't read it. I've prepared executive communications that have gone to the president. They've gone to executive leadership in the Congress. They've gone to leaders within the Department of Defense. And again, they're very busy individuals, a lot of responsibility. And they need to be able to understand what you're trying to tell them in a single page. So appropriately distilling information is a skill set I just strongly encourage you to hone, starting right now. Are you informed also? So if you distill down your information, is that information situationally informed? That's obviously very important to the work that I do in Washington, where things can change in a moment's notice. Are you giving a piece of information to a decision maker that is relevant, or did that piece of information happen to change last night because of something happened? Make sure you check your sources, that you understand the situation around which the information is going to be communicated. And so you can have confidence that what you were talking about is still relevant, still pertinent, and appropriately distilled again for the decision maker. So number 5, what's the method of communication? Is it written? Is it oral? Is it a briefing? Is it a PowerPoint briefing or another electronic briefing? Is it a spreadsheet? You need to figure this out. And you know, we laugh a lot, at least in Washington. Many of us with engineering degrees, we often think of ourselves as PowerPoint engineers, view graph engineers, because at times it seems like that's what we spend quite a bit of our time doing. So that's okay. Be competent in those tools, whatever the tool may happen to be. The presentation, whether it's Zoom or WebEx, be competent in the tool that you're using and make sure that you can appropriately manipulate the tool and provide the information that you were doing. I'll give you a hint and think about the type of communication. Again, I'll use Washington as an example. You need to have an elevator speech with regard to those distilled points. Because if you happen to be riding in the elevator with the CEO of your company or the senator or the president of the United States, what are the 2 or 3 talking points that you're going to deliver to that principal in about 15 seconds? Right? So that's your elevator speech. What's your 1-pager? Right? Again, distilled, but more information. I talked about that a few minutes ago in terms of how you frame that communication. What's your 1-pager? Your 1-pager should take about a minute to explain, right? So, Mr. President or Senator, here's my elevator speech, and here's a paper that I happen to have in my pocket, or I'll get it to you. And oh, by the way, after that, what's your more extensive briefing? That could be a 10-minute brief. It can be a 20-minute brief. Generally, it's not more than a 30-minute brief. If you're really speaking to a CEO of a company or an executive, you probably have about 10 minutes to get your point across. Because again, you're going to be one item on an agenda for a board, for a CEO, for a principal. So make sure that you can communicate in the right mechanism, in the right media for that period of time. Number 6, timing. Again, in terms of understanding the time frame of providing information, what's the optimal timing and duration of that information? And you'll need to figure out what that is. Obviously, if something is very, very complex, it's going to take a bit more time. If you are in a series of concurrent meetings or communications with principals, it's going to take more time. So just understand the time that you have, the time that's allotted. Like here, we're 25 minutes into this, and so I know that my time clock is running, and I want to leave time for Q&A. So just be prepared to understand the time that's allotted. Have backup information. Is perfectly fine to distill your presentation down to maybe 10 minutes and leave a whole bunch of backup information on the table for the principals to read and get back with you with any questions that they may have. So number 7, who's the right communicator? It may not be you, and that's okay. It may be your boss. It may be staff. It may be an outside expert, because in the domain that you are communicating, you may not have credibility. I know that's hard to say. You may actually be the expert that's done the work, that wants to communicate, but you may not be the right person to communicate. Think about who the right person is to get the right message to the right person at the right time. And that's part of your executive communication strategy. And it's perfectly fine if you're not the person, because it's not about you. It's about getting the right outcome for your company, right outcome for your project, right outcome for your nation, right? If depending on the level that you're briefing, trying to get to the right outcome. It's not about you. So think about it in that context. Part of your job is to figure out who the right briefer is for this information. Number 8. So we've talked about kind of the setup, if you will, for communications. Now let's think about after action, right? So that's all the setup, what I'm going to say, who I'm going to say it to, how long I have to say it. Now you've communicated. You got to figure out if you did a good job. Did your communication achieve the outcome that you wanted it to? And there's all kinds of online metrics. If you have a communication that may be public, was done through the press, was your communication accurate? You'll get feedback, and I encourage you to seek feedback if you don't get it in some form or fashion. But you have to assess whether your communication achieved the desired results. I suspect in the Q&A portion here that we'll be going to shortly, I'll get some feedback as to whether my comments on executive communications actually achieve the desired result. So get feedback, understand if you hit the mark, and if you didn't, you really need to understand what my next point is. What's the follow-up? Is there supplementary information that I need to provide that clarifies something that I either didn't present correctly, or the speaker didn't present correctly, or the receiver didn't hear correctly? How do I make sure that the information that I wanted to transmit, the decision that I want to facilitate, was appropriately received and acted on? Don't be shy about correcting things that you said wrong. I can't tell you the number of times where I've given information to a principal and only to realize right before they're going off to another meeting, a higher level meeting, that the information I gave either changed because of something that happened in the environment or was not as correct as it should have been. Don't be afraid to chase that person down, hand them the correct paper on the way to their meeting. They will be forever grateful. That's what they're going to pay you to do, to give the right information, right? So no pride of authorship. Make sure you have the correct information or follow-up information. Then last but not least, once you transmit, once you follow up, once you assess, the last one is kind of the hardest. Check your ego. Does the message need to change? Did I miss the mark? Do I need to start over? And that's okay. Again, it's not about you. It's about getting the right message to the right person at the right time to make a very important decision. Do I need to change the message and start all over again, right at the top of my 10 points, with crafting a new message and making sure that's refined and making sure the speaker is right and making sure that the media is right? And so that's my summary. And maybe I will stop there, and we'll go into more of a moderated session. And I'm really looking forward to your questions. And again, appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, at least in virtual land.
Okay. I'm looking to see if we have any questions yet. No, but I have questions. So we would want you to leave without being grilled a little bit, right? Okay. So my first question is because I'm always interested in the technology, and maybe the group would also be interested, not only your communications role and what you talked about, I think is extraordinarily valuable in my experience about being able to communicate projects effectively or on any subject when you're in a corporation. It's what makes your career. If you can't do it, you don't progress. So my first question though is, would you talk a little bit about your advanced technology organization and what kind of new innovations are going on in that organization?
So this is actually an enterprise-wide endeavor that I lead for Huntington Ingalls. And so we actually do R&D in a couple of different domains. We do it within our business units. And so that could happen within Newport News Shipbuilding for technologies that may be directly pertinent to aircraft carriers or submarines, things that we design and build. I forgot to say earlier during my opening remarks, we design and build the largest, most complex machines on the planet. So let that sink in for a minute, right? You think about an aircraft carrier, largest, most complex machine on the planet. Same thing for a submarine, not as large as a carrier, but I would argue probably the most complex machine on the planet. And so we will do research and development within the business units that specifically apply perhaps to one of those products. Maybe it's a product that we're currently building, maybe it's a future product. And we spend a lot of time on projects that we derive by ourselves, and we also work with our customers. So in the case of Navy projects, we work with the Office of Naval Research and other entities that sponsor research and development. And the topic there can range from systems, power generation, connectivity, energy storage, those types of things, to integration of new power architectures. There's just a whole range of things that you can do, obviously, for ships and shipboard. I think a lot about architecture in the domain, because to me, it's all about the architecture, what you have today. It's and so that's where those R&D entities focus on, whether it's there or our yard down in Mississippi that focuses more on surface ships, the conventional surface ships, or our group, frankly, that focuses more on services and the intelligence community and some of the other endeavors. My organization focuses enterprise-wide. So my challenge is to think about the things that benefit every single element or more than a single element in our company. And so we focus a bit on autonomy and unmanned things. I'm not at liberty to talk about a lot of detail here for lots of reasons, but so we focus on things that perhaps can aid and support either a current market area or grow market opportunities on the side of our business that works in IT. We have a good portion of our company that works in cyber, and so we spend a bit of time in that domain as well. And in fact, if you're familiar with the cyber standards that the government recently put out, we actually had a hand in helping to write those. So we have opportunities looking across Huntington Ingalls to focus on enterprise-wide thing in system architecture, autonomy, unmanned, manufacturing, process, as well as, again, technologies that can support future needs.
Okay, that's very interesting. It's a very, you don't think of shipbuilding as being that complex, but when you get down to it, these are the most complex single devices on the planet. So one question is about how have you operated under the COVID environment? What has changed in your operation in being able to operate successfully?
So the biggest thing for us, we never closed. A lot of industries closed in this country. We made the decision early on that if we ever closed, it would be very, very difficult to reopen. And oh, by the way, things that we were doing, building, supporting, go right to the national security posture of this country. And so we work very closely with the Department of Defense. We are designated as an essential industry, right? We're on that list of essential workers that we're able to continue working even in the face of shutdowns and edicts by governors to close down businesses. We never stopped working. Now we changed the way we worked, and I'll talk about that in two ways. Again, 42,000 folks, probably 30,000 or so of those are on, as we say, the deck plate in manufacturing in some form or fashion. And so obviously you can't build a ship remotely. But what we did was we looked at the work that was being done and we said, where we can, we're going to maximize the telework posture of our corporation. So my venue is Washington, D.C. All told, we probably have about 500 folks in Washington in the national capital region, right? So that's D.C., Maryland, Northern Virginia. We said we're going to maximize telework. And so corporation-wise, we went from about 100 people that were teleworking at any one time to over 10,000. And we did that in the space of about a week. And so like everyone else, we quickly learned what tools we had available. We quickly learned what bandwidth we had available. And we also learned about challenges to that in terms of holding these conferences and what we could do. On the waterfront, though, the 30,000 odd folks that are working day to day in our business, we did a couple of things. The very first thing we did was realize we need to be the source of information, a single source of information for folks that our employees can come to for ground truth. There were so many sources of information in COVID, CDC website, all these different websites, a lot of social media. We decided to be kind of a clearinghouse of all that for our folks. And that turned out to be a very valued thing, not just for us, the 30,000 or 42,000 folks in the company, But for our 5,000 suppliers, well, who did not have the ability or means to do that, we as it turns out, became a single source of information for them as well. So even today, you can go to our website and look at our COVID resources and tie back to the Defense Department or the CDC. So that's the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we said, we are going to take every incentive away for people to work when they're sick. So think about that. We have all kinds of HR policies, and we have a lot of folks that want to come to work, that want to do the right thing, even when they're not really feeling well. That's the antithesis of what we all should be doing. So we incentivize folks, if they were not feeling well, to stay home. And to stay home, we would connect them virtually if we could. We wanted them to get tested, so we encouraged testing. So we created the mechanisms by which folks would stay home and be paid, right? They wouldn't have to take sick leave, but stay home, make sure you're well, because the last thing we wanted to do was have you come to work and infect a whole group of people and then take down our ability to build these ships. The third thing we did is put protocols in place to make sure that we had protective equipment and social distancing. We reworked the way we build ships. So we looked at work packages, how you build a ship, where you physically build a ship or whatever you happen to be working on, and when you do it. We dispersed the workforce into 3 shifts. And so we really looked at where we worked, how we worked, and when we worked. We essentially made the workplace the safest place to be. And if you look at our stats in terms of COVID infections or folks that are getting COVID from, so we succeeded there. So it's a challenge. Like everyone else, I'm looking forward to getting through this and getting back to normal. But I think we will all come out of this stronger, and we will, including virtual tools, I think have a new normal. I think we'll have a hybrid to some extent going forward.
Okay, from Professor Steve Miller, we have a question about what advice do you have for students and also new professors for communicating complicated technical ideas to potential new supervisors or program managers?
Yeah, that gets back to one of my first points, right? Distilling down the information. Jim, as you know, you may be briefing a leader in a company who is not technically oriented, right? They may have a different degree. I've interfaced with folks in business who they may be running a technical company, a major defense contractor, but they may have a background in business. They may have a background in communications. They may have a background in something that's non-science or engineering. And so the advice is this, that look at every acronym you may have in your presentation and get rid of it. I run into this, I'm on several different boards, and I find that boards are very, very competent, but they're also very diverse in terms of the backgrounds that people bring. You can't speak in acronyms. You have to explain what you're talking about. And so you got to assume that your audience, and again, whether it's new professors or junior folks, make sure you explain what you're talking about, that not everybody's going to be up to speed on the technology, the terminology, or other components of what you're going to be briefing. So that's the very first thing. The second thing, again, is, and again, it goes back to what I said earlier, understand their perspective. Even though they may not have background in a particular area that you are briefing, they may have something that's equivalent. I found, and not surprisingly, people really want to understand, and they want to understand from a perspective of their own experience. And so if I decide to brief Jim on something, I really need to understand his background, where he came from, because even though he doesn't know shipbuilding, he may know an aspect of business or an aspect of technology that will resonate with him. And so as the recipient's trying to understand in their own paradigm what you're talking about. And so try to understand their background so you can put it into terms and create an analogy for them that will make sense, right? We all like to think that we're unique, that what we do is unique, but in fact, as engineers, we know this, we focus on process, right? The process is the thing, the architecture is the thing, the outcome, that may be different and unique, but we all follow these engineering processes, right? So talk about it in terms of process, talk about it in terms of outcomes, talk about it in terms of technology that the recipient may actually have some background in. And you'll find that you will make a lot of progress in conveying complex thought to an individual who doesn't have background from your domain.
Okay. The next question is from Professor Banks, and he says that obviously you are more skilled now than you received your BS degree. What are other key experiences, training you would point to as a form that was formative in your communications abilities?
Okay, so I know that Mary Church and Dr. Banks will love when I say this, but there are things that students and professors can do today to help hone their skills. And there are leadership opportunities right there on campus through student groups, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, aerospace industries, all these student groups, Society of Women Engineers, they provide leadership opportunities for students. When I was a student at Florida, I was very involved with ASME. I held every office all the way up to president. I was very involved with, at the time, the Benton Engineering Student Council. It was the Engineering Student Council. I think it still exists, hopefully. But again, there, opportunity, work my way up through secretary and treasurer to understand how those organizations worked. I gained tremendous experience, leadership experience in those groups. And I encourage folks to be engaged. It doesn't have to be there. You can be involved in other groups for leadership. You can be involved in groups off campus, but get involved in an opportunity with an opportunity to speak and lead and hone those skills. For me, building upon the positions that I had over time, obviously you have training, you have media training. When you're testifying before the Congress as a principal within the Navy, they give you an opportunity to do a hearing before you do a real hearing. And so you'll have the opportunity to speak and present. But as we said earlier, and as Jim noted, if you want to progress in terms of leadership in a company or wherever you happen to be in your own company, you're going to have to learn how to communicate and lead in whatever venue you're going to find yourself in.
That's great, Mitch. This is really valuable to our students. And Carolyn asked a follow-on question. Can you speak a little more about the competing entity and how to communicate effectively and how you would find yourself in that situation?
I'll give you an example. We are Huntington Ingalls builds nuclear submarines for the Navy. There's only 2 nuclear shipbuilders in this nation. The Congress and the executive branch, in its wisdom, decided that that's a good thing to have, and there is focus on maintaining those 2 shipbuilders. So for nuclear submarines, for the Virginia-class submarine, we're actually teamed with the other shipbuilder, General Dynamics Electric Boat, and we are teammates. And yet there are other times when General Dynamics and we find ourselves competing for things. So we compete on destroyers. They have a shipyard up in Maine. We have a shipyard in Mississippi. We compete. But again, for General Dynamics, we also team with them on an endeavor. So let me back off from those specific eaches and talk about it this way. In Washington, and I think wherever you are, it's all about relationships. Whether you're an engineering professor teaching, or in industry, or in government, you're going to see the same people or kind of the same group of folks over time for your entire career. And my resume is probably a good example of it. I've been on the government side of this, the executive branch. I've been on the legislative side in the Congress, and now I'm with industry. But I've basically been working with the same group of folks for 40 years. And so while you act with integrity where you are sitting and you represent your team to the best of your ability, you have to recognize it's all about relationships. And those relationships last a long, long time. So I'll go back to the value slide from the Huntington Ingalls brief. The very first bullet was integrity. If you have integrity in what you do and you can be trusted and speak with authority and speak with accuracy and correct your mistakes. Again, run down the hall, give your boss that corrected white paper, or call your colleague and say, hey, I gave you bad information. If you're known as that person, you can work effectively in this domain no matter what seat you're in, because you're respected as a person with integrity, you have credibility, and folks will give you your time and your voice.
Okay. Justin Ehrenstein asks about preparing the pitch. With a known audience can take time. How exactly do you prepare an elevator one-page pitch for a chance encounter with someone of importance to make sure you are not surprised?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, you need to know your topic forwards and backwards. You really need to understand what the decision is that you want the decision maker to affect. But back up there for a second, actually. Do you really understand who the decision maker is? In Washington, there are decision makers at all levels of government. Who is the decision maker you're trying to influence? So with that decision maker, you can hone your message. Is it a budget decision that I'm trying to affect? Is it a programmatic decision that I'm trying to affect? Is it a resourcing decision? Is it a technology decision? So understand who the decision maker is, and then hone your message to that particular individual. It is very unusual to find a single decision maker for everything, right? And so even if you're talking to the CEO of the company, there are lots of decisions that will happen before you get to that CEO. Make sure you understand who the right decision maker is at the right level and hone your message for that decision. Take a step back from what you're briefing. I use a technique that's pretty simple. If I have a report or if I have a briefing, I usually just lay it out on a table, right? And I don't care if it's 10 slides, 20 slides, or 20 slides or 30 slides, lay it out. Oh, by the way, don't ever give really a 30-slide brief unless you're at a technical symposium and you have 2 hours, right? Call your brief down, but lay it out and see what the major themes are, see what the trends are, understand what the decision points are and what you're trying to get across. And if you're not ready, if they don't come to you, you're not ready yet to brief, right? You got to take a step back and really understand what the issues are, what the 1, 2, or 3 issues are. And I'm telling you, the most complex problems, you know this as engineers, most complex problems can be broken down into segments. That's what we do. We don't bite the elephant off at once. We break very complex things down. Think about a ship. Think about an aircraft carrier over 1,000 feet long, hundreds, thousands of miles of cabling, thousands of subsystems. And yet it all comes together. Why? Because we break it down into components and individual issues. So if you're having a hard time understanding what the issue is, you may not have broken your problem down into enough component pieces whereby you can get the decision for the component part in eaches and then build them up to a bigger issue.
Okay. So Ryan Gonzalez asks, as a student, what influenced you to go from being a mechanical engineering undergrad to go to law school, and what was the transition like?
So for me, you'll laugh when I say this. Engineers and lawyers have a lot in common. Sorry to all my engineering colleagues and all the professors in the department, but you think about it. Again, go back to what I said before. In engineering, you have facts, you have rules or laws. You apply the rules or laws to the facts, you get an engineering solution. Think about the law. You have facts, you have laws, you get a legal solution. Now, the difference in law is, by the nature of our system, you apply facts, you apply laws, and in law, you get 2 solutions, right? Not a single solution necessarily, but you may get opposing positions, right? And that's the nature, the beauty of our legal system. So from a process perspective, the practice or the process of law and the process of engineering are actually very common at their core. I went to law school, as Jim mentioned, at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., the Patent and Trademark Office is resident, and by and large, a good number of those folks who work for the Patent and Trademark Office, they choose to go to law school. The Patent Office used to pay, I don't know if they still do, but we had an awful lot of engineers in my class. About 30% of my class at Catholic were engineers, a very high percentage. A very good percentage of the folks in my classes. I did some postdoc work at GW. Good percentage of those folks were engineers as well. And so if you want to do patent law, it's the combination of engineering and law, I think at its finest. You have to be a scientist or engineer to do that. But I would say there's a lot more similarity than my engineering friends want to say. I will say this though. When I'm speaking to a group of engineers, I tell them I'm an engineer. When I speak to a group of lawyers, I tell them I'm an engineer.
Okay, Anthony Concepcion asks a rather provocative question. As a lobbyist in Washington, what ethical challenge have you had to face? How does your experience in navigating such ethical issues add value to your company?
So I want to redefine the term lobbyist, because I know in some parlance it's not a very nice word. I have a different view of it, and again, of course I would, but let me take a step back, and I'll list some names for you, and they could be former military chiefs, they can be former service members, they can be former members of Congress, they can be former principals in a department anywhere, any of the government agencies, and yet they may find themselves in the position of lobbying like myself. I really push back on the notion that lobbying, if you will, is a dirty thing. I think the nature of our legislative branch, if you go back to the history of how the Congress, and again, I was in the Senate, I look to experts in industry. I don't care if that was aerospace and defense or pharmaceuticals or technology. I look to those experts to provide me information. And were they lobbying? I guess. I mean, if you look up the definition of lobbying, it's engagement of the Congress to affect an outcome. And in fact, the definition of lobbying is even broader than that. You can actually lobby the executive branch. When you lobby cabinet level officials or engage with them, that's also considered lobbying. I know that we don't talk about that very much, but it's the same characterization. That is lobbying as well. And so the nature of our system is so large and so complex that as a senior staffer, I would always reach out to industry. Again, whatever the issue happened to be, I didn't have the depth to deal with that. And I would argue that the nature of our institutions, we have to rely on industry to bring us expertise, right? Those are the briefings you may be giving to a member of Congress or to the president or to cabinet level officials. Is that lobbying? Yeah, technically it is, but you're the expert. And the way I navigated it goes back to, again, what I said before. Do you have integrity in what you do? Right? Can you be counted on to provide your perspective? And do you have, are you competent? Do you have the competence where people can rely on you? And if the answer to those questions is yes, and hopefully it will be, you'll have the credibility to do that. And so I don't view this lobbying thing as an evil thing. I view it as an aspect of our government. That's how we're structured. I guess we have a choice. We can enlarge our government to the point where we have experts in every single domain, and I guess they'll just work for the government and be on the payroll. That's not my view of how government can be efficient, though. My view is you keep government experts at a very high level, and you bring in the expertise in whatever the matter happens to be, to testify, to provide perspective. And oh, by the way, again, as a senior staffer, one of the things I really enjoyed was getting expertise from a broad range of people, right? When I talked a pharmaceutical issue, I'd talk to all of pharma. When I talked a space issue, I would talk to all the folks working on space. When I talked a national security issue, I talked to a broad range of folks in the executive branch and in industry. And then it was up to the Congress, the leaders in the Congress and the committees, to parse all that information, to hopefully create policy that was effective and pertinent. And if it wasn't, to go back and fix it in a subsequent piece of legislation.
Thanks, Mitch, on that question. That adds a lot of clarification how government works. And I think most cases, just like lawyers are considered to be not so nice, so are lobbyists. But that's unfortunately the situation we find ourselves. People don't necessarily understand the roles of what people play. So the last question we have time for is from Mina, and she is interested in would it be possible to form a STEM alliance with a learning pathway, for example, certificates for credit that combine apprenticeships and courses to complement experiential learning?
So I don't know if that's a Huntington Ingalls industry specific question or maybe in the department. I think that's a great idea. And let me talk about it this way. I didn't mention it, but again, I encourage you to go back and look at our website. We actually run 2 apprentice schools. They're over 100. One of them is over 100 years old. The other, I think, is about 80 years old. And the one we run in Newport News is actually like a Division III university. You can get a bachelor's degree there. And that's exactly what we do in our apprentice schools. When you come to work for us, if you choose to go into the apprentice programs, if you're selected, and oh, by the way, we're more selective than Harvard. We get about 10,000 applications for 300-400 slots every year. And so we have many folks coming in and applying that are switching careers. Many folks already have bachelor's degree, or in some case masters, want to come in and learn the art and craft of shipbuilding. And that is exactly the combination you mentioned. You come to work, you have classroom, you have experiential opportunities, you create a pathway to be a leader within the shipyard. We have vice presidents in our company that are graduates of the apprentice school. And so I am all for opportunities to grow apprentice learning, experiential learning, whether it's a certificate program, or in our case, it can actually be a degree program where you can get an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. We don't have any graduate degrees yet, but if you want to play Division III sports, you can actually come to our schools and do that.
Well, Mitch, I think you're just a fantastic example of one of our grads. We hope all our grads become as successful as you have. I think your example of how to communicate, just how you delivered your talk today, I think sets a great example, and all the students should take you as a great example for how to communicate. And we really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your perspective. And so I'll end today's session by saying, coming soon, another new episode of our new industry insights. So stay tuned. Thank you very much, everybody. And again, thanks, Mitch. Much appreciated.
Thank you, GM, and go Gators.